Welcome back to On the Same Page. We are on Daf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph 11a of Maseches Kiddushin. We're about 10 lines down on the page. The first word on the line is about Kesef. And Gemara is actually going back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah, after it talked about the 3 ways to do Kiddushin, it then went into further detail about Kesef. It said when it comes to Kesef, when it comes to doing Kiddushin with money, Beis Shammai Omrim Bedinar. Beis Shammai says you have to use the minimal amount to do Kiddushin is a dinar, and Beis Hillel said even a pruta, a dinar is a silver currency, pruta is a copper coin, and it's worth much less, very little, and the Mishnah said that Beis Hillel says you can use a pruta, but Beis Shammai insists on a dinar. The Mishnah actually went on, and it said, how much is a pruta? It's an eighth of an Isar Ha'italki, this Italian Isar coin, and that was the discussion of the Mishnah. The Gemara is going to actually be examining Beis Shammai's opinion. Beis Shammai said, in order to have Kiddushin, a pruta is not enough. A pruta is like the most minimal amount of money. That's what Beis Hillel said you can use. Beis Shammai says, no, you got to use more than the minimal. So the Gemara asks, Mai Taimayu de Beis Shammai. What's the reason for Beis Shammai? Why did they say you have to use at least a dinar? Amar Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera explained, Shekain Isha Makbedes al Atzma. Because a woman is makbed on herself, she's careful about herself, she's not just willing to give herself over for so little, like a pruta. Ve'eng miskadesh is pachos midinar. And it's beneath her honor. She's not willing to be betrothed for less than a dinar. That's why Beis Shammai says that you need a dinar. That's how Reb Zera explained Beis Shammai. Because a woman won't accept less. It's beneath her honor. Amar le Abaye. Abaye said to him, Ela me'ata. So now, according to your logic, what about a situation kigon banse de Rabbi Yanai? What if you have girls like the daughters of Rabbi Yanai? De kaptaran afshayu. They were from the high echelons of society. They were very, very makbid, very careful about their own honor. And they wouldn't accept Kiddushin for less than, or if you were basing it on their honor, at least he's saying, they wouldn't accept it for less than a whole kav. A tarkov is a kav, it's a volume measurement. Sorry, it's multiple kavin. It's 3 kavin, which is a measurement of volume, 3 kavs of dinari, of gold dinars. They would want basically like a wagon load to I don't know exactly what it is, but a lot of gold, that's what they would take. So you're going to say, according to your logic, that a regular woman can't be mikudeshes for just a pruta because it's beneath her honor. She wants more. For her honor, she expects more. And that's why it has to be at least a dinar. So you're going to say that the daughters of Rabbi Yanai, who are really, honorable, that they wouldn't, that for them it would take, if they want 3 kavs worth of gold dinars, that's what it's going to take to be mekadesh them. So, and he says, if he finishes off the question, he says, Hachi nami. You're going to say, De'i pashta yada v'kibla chad zuzah me'acher. If she would reach out her hand and accept just a single zuz, which is a dinar, which is her Beis Shammai's dinar, if she would accept a zuz, hachinami de lo havi kiddushin, you're going to tell me that it's not kiddushin, because they only for them it has to be 3 kavs worth of gold dinars. That's what you're going to argue. So Amarle, so Reb Zera said back, Pashta yada v'kibla lo kamina. I didn't speak about a case where she reached out and accepted that amount, or less than that amount. Ki kamina, what was I speaking about? Dikacha bolelia, if she accepted the Kiddushin at night and couldn't see how much it was, inami deshat yishliach, or she appointed a messenger to go receive the Kiddushin and didn't specify how much she'd be willing to take. That's what I was talking about. In other words, when Beis Shammai, Reb Zera is saying that when Beis Shammai says that Kiddushin is with the dinar, what he means is the stam Kiddushin, the assumed amount of Kiddushin would be a dinar. Now, if a woman accepted less, accepted a pruta, then yeah, it would work. That would work. But normally, a woman doesn't accept less than that. That's what Beis Shammai says, and therefore, if she wouldn't specify, if she would send a messenger and not specify how much she wants, then we would assume for her that she wants a dinar. And if she accepted Kiddushin at night and couldn't see how much it was, and it was less than a dinar, then we'll assume that she didn't really want it. And the daughters of Rabbi Yanai also, they're used to getting 3 calves worth of, they would expect 3 calves worth of gold dinars, then that's what the assumed Kiddushin for them would be. And the same would hold true if they sent a messenger to receive. If it was only a dinar, it wouldn't be enough. You need 3 calves worth of dinars. And so on. So according to Reb Zera's explanation of Beis Shammai is not really saying the minimal amount, he's saying what we assume. We assume, unless she accepts less, that she wants a dinar for Kiddushin. If she accepts less than that, then that would work. That seemingly is how Reb Zera is understanding Beis Shammai. Rav Yosef Amar, the Gemara continues, Rav Yosef says no. And his explanation would seem to hold that Beis Shammai always requires a dinar or more. Rav Yosef Amar Tamayu de Beis Shammai ked Rav Yehuda Amar Rav Asi. The reasoning of Beis Shammai can be understood based on what Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav Asi. Da Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav Asi. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav Asi, Kol kesef ha'amur b'Torah. Anytime the Torah speaks about kesef, speaks about money, kesef tsuri. It's talking about kesef from Tsur, from Tyre, which was a main, it was an empire, country in the times of the Torah, and that was a common currency, was the Tsur, the silver of Tsur, of Tyre. And when the Torah refers to an amount of kesef, of silver, it's referring to the currency of Tyre, of Tsur. V'shal divrayim kesef medina. Now, when the rabbis in the Mishnah, etc., refer to a currency, they're talking about kesef medina, the local currency, which is 1/8 of the kesef Tsur. So Rashi explains to us here that wherever the Torah says shekel, it means shekel tsuri. It means the Tyre shekel, and if it just says shekel without specifying an amount, so it's the lowest possible currency of the Tsur currency, which Rashi actually is going to bring 2 different opinions as to whether shekel is the lowest currency, and that's why whether a dinar is the lowest currency, a silver dinar is the lowest currency, and that's why when the Torah says, it never says explicitly actually that you do Kiddushin with shekel, but we learn it from Stei Ephraim, we learn it that you can use shkalim for Kiddushin, or you can use money, and the assumed amount would be, the assumed currency would be the Tyre currency, the Tsur currency, and the assumed amount would be the lowest amount of that currency, which is 1 dinar. Now, there's another understanding, which is that actually there is a lower currency as well, a lower denomination of that currency, lower than a dinar, which is a mi'ah, and a mi'ah is lower, so why can't you do Kiddushin with a ma'ah? Why do you need a dinar, which is a higher amount? So Rashi says, because, well, first of all, right, the idea is, the reason why we know it's not a pruta is because a pruta is copper. Rashi says there were no copper prutas in the Tsur currency, so clearly that's not what the Kiddushin that the Torah is talking about, with a pruta of copper, and rather it's talking about with silver. And how do we know which level, why don't we assume that it's the lowest level, if there was, assuming like the opinion, like the approach that there was a lower level of currency than a dinar, called a ma'ah, so why isn't it a ma'ah? Why can't you do Kiddushin with a ma'ah? Why does Beis Shammai say you need a dinar, a higher amount? So Rashi says that from the fact that the Torah didn't want you to use something smaller like a pruta, so you see that it wanted something chashuv, it wanted something better. So if it wanted something better, something chashuv, something significant, then also a ma'ah isn't going to cut it. And it wouldn't be the lowest level of currency, but rather it would be a higher level, which would be the next best, which would be the dinar. So again, there's two approaches. One is that the dinar is the lowest amount of the currency, and that's why we know it's a dinar, according to Beis Shammai. And the second approach is that we understand that the Torah didn't want you to use the lowest amount, it wanted something more significant, which would be a dinar. Now the Gemara is going to examine the statement of Rav Yehuda Amar Rav Asi, this idea that he says that whenever the Torah says an amount, it's referring to, whenever it talks about kesef, silver at least, it's referring to the tzur currency, or really, I guess all money in the Torah is in that way, shkalim. So it's always referring to the currency of tzur, and when the rabbis speak about it, it's the currency of Medina, the local country currency, which is 1/8 of that. So the Gemara is going to now examine that. It says, asks the Gemara, uklalahu, is that a rule? Is that always true that whenever the Torah says, it talks about money, it means kesef tzuri, it means tzur kesef, and it can't be prutos, it can't be copper. Top of the next page, v'harei ta'ana. What about the case of the ta'ana? The ta'ana is a claim. If someone makes a claim, what kind of claim are we talking about? T'chsiv, the pasuk says, ki yiting isha re'u kesef o kelim lishmar. If a man gives to his friend some money, or some kelim, some vessels to guard, and what happens? And then he comes and he says, please give it back. And he says, you owe me, and he names an amount. You have to give me back, you were watching my kelim, you were watching my vessels, or my money, and he says the amount. And the other guy says, no, it's not that amount. It's a lower amount. It's what we call modeh b'mikta sataina. If he admits to part of the taina, part of the claim, so the halacha is, so he admitted, I owe you, let's say the original demand was $10, and the guy admitted, he says, I'm not watching $10 for you, or I didn't borrow $10 from you, only $5. So that's called modeh b'miktas. He admitted to part of it. The halacha is that he has to take a shvuah, he has to take an oath on the part that he's denying. If he denies the whole thing, then he doesn't have to take an oath. But if, and you know, we say amot mechaver elav harayah. We say whoever wants to extract, he has to bring a proof. If the creditor can't prove it, then he can't get the money. That's if the guy was kofer bakol, he denied the whole thing. He's like, I don't owe you anything. Then he doesn't have to take a shvuah, he doesn't have to take an oath. But if he's modeh b'miktas, if he admits to part of it, then the halacha is he has to take an oath on the other half that he's denying. So it says, Utanan, the Mishnah teaches us, shvuas hadayanim, that there's a shvuah that's imposed by the shvuah that's imposed by the judges. It's not with less than the following. Hatana shtei kesef. It's only if the claim was for at least 2 kesef, 2 silvers. V'hauda shava pruta. But the admission, the admission and the denial, the admission was at least for a pruta, for a copper pruta. So what do we see from here? So we see that, where do we get these numbers from? Why does it say that the minimal amount in order to obligate someone to take a shvuah is I have to demand at least shtei kesef, 2 silvers? Why not 1? Why isn't it at least just 1? Meaning the Torah teaches us that if a person admits to they admit to part of it, then they're required to take an oath. So where do we get these numbers from? That it has to be that the demand was you owe me at least 2 kesef, 2 silvers, and the denial, the admission has to be for at least 1 gold pruta. So as Rashi explains, from the fact that it chooses 2, so we see that the Torah wasn't so specific about the silver. It just meant money in general. And the Torah wasn't specifying something. If it was specifying, it would be I guess 1, the minimal amount of silver. Where do we get 2 from? 2 silvers. So it must be that it's not specifying. And the Chachamim, it was the sages who decided, what's the reg amount, what's fair, what they feel should be the amount to require the shvuah. But if the Torah was if it was referring to a specific type of currency, then we should say it's the minimal amount of that currency. It should be 1 ma, which is the minimal currency for tzur. And where do we get this idea that it's 2 silvers? 2 silver ma's. Where do we get 2 from? So we see that the Torah was not specific about any specific currency or any specific amount of money. So that's the question. So the Gemara says, no, that's different. Hasam, over there, dumya de kelim. We learned that it should be similar to kelim, which is plural, vessels. Ma kelim shnayim, af kesef shnayim. That just like, right, the pasuk says, ki yiting ishal re'eu kesef o kelim. A man gives to his friend either money or kelim, vessels, plural. So how many vessels is vessels? It's at least 2. So the money also that the pasuk is talking about is at least 2. At least 2 of the minimal amount in that currency of the tzur currency, which is 2 ma'ah. So that's why the Mishnah says that the minimum amount to obligate someone in the shvuah, in the oath, is to demand at least 2 kesefs, 2 silver ma'as, to fit into the pasuk that kiteng ishal re'eu kesef o kelim. If somebody gives to his friend kesef or kelim, kelim is 2, kesef is also 2, at least 2. That's how the Mishnah knew that it's talking about 2, but it really is derived from the Torah directly. The Torah is telling you 2 of the minimal amount of the currency in the tzur currency, which is 2 ma'ah. The Gemara adds in one more thing: Uma kesef davar chashuv, af kelim davar chashuv. We also learned something the other way, that just like kesef is something significant, money is significant. So the kelim, the vessels, also have to be at least of that significance, that they have to be at least worth 2 kesef. So the same thing, that we say that in order to obligate a shvuah, to obligate a oath, for the person who was moded the miktas, who admitted to part of it, the demand from the creditor has to be, by money it has to be at least 2 kesef, and we learn from money that the kelim, the vessels, if it was a case where it wasn't money, it was, you borrowed my lawnmower or whatever, or you borrowed 2 lawnmowers, whatever it might be, right? It's kelim, plural. You borrowed my tools, so the items have to be worth at least 2 ma'a kesef in order to obligate the one who was moded miktas, who admitted in part, in a shvuah, in an oath. Okay, so we have another question. So far we left it standing. We defended the opinion of Rav Yehuda in the name of Rav Asi, that whenever the Torah talks about money, it's talking about the tzur currency. Says the Gemara, V'harei meiser, but what about meiser, tithing? D'chsiv, it says with regards to meiser sheni. Meiser sheni is when it's practiced in the first and second year of the Shemitah cycle, and the 4th and 5th, that you have to tithe a 10th of your fruit, and you have to bring it to Yerushalayim and eat it in Yerushalayim. The tithe is eaten by you, it has to be eaten in Yerushalayim. The halacha is, if you don't want to schlep all your fruit, you can redeem it for money and bring the money and buy food in Yerushalayim. So the pasuk says, V'tzarta hakesef biyadecha. It says you should take the money that you've used to redeem the fruit, and you should wrap it up and bring it with you. Now it refers to kesef, silvers. You should wrap up the silvers. Utanan, but there's a Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Haporet sela mimaos meiser sheni. If a person is flipping their prutas that they redeemed for meiser, the copper prutas, if they're flipping those for their silver sela or dinar from Meiser Sheni. So what do we have here? What we have is the Mishnah speaks about a case where somebody had copper prutas that they redeemed for their Meiser Sheni. They had their fruit. They didn't want to ship all their fruit to Yerushalayim. They redeemed it for their copper prutas. They're now going to bring their copper prutas to Yerushalayim. But then they amassed a lot of copper prutas. So now they don't want to bring all that cash. They want to bring a bigger currency. So they want to now flip the copper for silver. That's the case that it speaks about. But what we see, the conclusion doesn't really matter. It tells you what to do in the Mishnah there. But we see that originally the Mishnah talks about a person who was mechalel, who redeemed his Meiser Sheni fruit for copper prutas, even though they're not part of the entire currency. So how can you do that? If the pasuk says to use kesef, to use silver, and we say that has to be the tzur currency, well, this isn't the tzur currency. So how come you're allowed to use prutas? So the Gemara says there is an exception, because there it says kesef ha-kesef riba. The way Rashi learns this it keeps repeating kesef over and over again in that section, and therefore it's coming to teach you other types of money as well. Normally when it talks about money in the Torah, it means just the entire currency, but there it repeated and repeated kesef, kesef. Therefore we learn from there a riboy to include more, to include also other forms of currency like prutas, like copper prutas. Ask the Gemara about hektish. What about hektish? Sanctifying an object for the temple. Dechsiv, the pasuk says, if you want to redeem that, if you sanctify something to donate to the temple, now they don't want your tools, your screwdrivers, right? They want your money. That's what they could use. So if you sanctify your tools for temple use, so you would then redeem it for money and give the money. So the pasuk says, "V'nasan hakasef v'kamlo." You give the money in exchange for the item, and then you get it back. The Amar Shmuel, and Shmuel said, "Hektish shava maneh." With regards to that, Shmuel talks about the following case. He says, if you have hektish that's worth a maneh, it's worth a maneh. A maneh, I think, is 100. A maneh. Okay, whatever it's worth. You have a maneh, and you redeem it for a shava pruta. Mechulal. You redeem it for a shava pruta, for just a pruta. Rashi's girsa actually takes out the word shava. It works better without the word shava. Shechulal ala pruta. You redeemed it for a pruta, for a copper pruta. It's mechulal. The redeeming works. Now Shmuel is teaching us actually that even though the item was worth much more, it was worth a maneh, and he redeemed it for much less, for just a copper pruta, that works by hektish. There's no ona by hektish. Ona is that you can't underpay for something or overpay for something. By hektish, you're allowed to underpay to redeem something. But side point, the point is that he's using a copper pruta to redeem hektish. But the Torah says that you give nasar kesef, give the kesef. Kesef is silver, that should be the tzur currency. How can you give a copper pruta which isn't part of the tzur currency? So again, we see it doesn't have to be part of the tzur currency, even though it's in the Torah. So the Gemara says, again, hasamnami kesef yalef. Now there also, we learn out from kesef yalef mi meiser. We learn from meiser, because meiser also was about redeeming, and we learned by meiser that when you redeem your Meiser Sheni, you don't have to use, because it said kesef a bunch of times, you don't have to use the tzur currency, you can use other currencies. So we learn hektish, which is also redeeming, something that was sanctified for the Beis HaMikdash, for the temple, you're redeeming that. We learn from Meiser that when it comes to redeeming, it doesn't have to be the currency of the Torah. There it's an exception, it could be a different currency. Asks the Gemara about Kiddushay Isha, but what about Kiddushin of a woman? Dichsiv, the pasuk says, Ki yikach ish isha ubala. If a man takes a wife, the Gamar, and we know we've talked about Gamar. We learn out kicha mistei Ephron. We learn out from stay Ephron. We have a Gzeira Shava, like it says kicha here to take, and it says kicha there by the purchase of the fields of Ephron to take. And we learn out that just like the fields of Ephron were purchased with money, so too you could do Kiddushin with money. Utanang, our Mishnah says, Beis Hillel Amrim, Beis Hillel says, Bipruta uveshava pruta. Beis Hillel says you can do Kiddushin with a pruta or a shava pruta. So you're using a pruta, a copper pruta. Are you going to tell me, says the Gemara, Neima Rav Asi da Amar ke Beis Shammai? Are you going to tell me that Rav Asi holds like Beis Shammai? In other words, originally we used the statement of Rav Yehuda in the name of Rav Asi to explain Beis Shammai, and we said Beis Shammai was was of the same opinion as Rav Yehuda in the name of Rav Asi. But does Rav Asi hold like Beis Shammai? That would be very problematic. We know that halacha is generally like Beis Hillel. We only have Rav Asi holding like Beis Shammai. Yet he seems to be contradicting Beis Hillel. Rav Asi saying that whenever the Torah talks about a currency, it means the Torah currency. And that would exclude using a pruta, a copper pruta. And yet, Beis Hillel is the one who says that you can use a copper pruta for Kiddushin. So it seems that the Torah allows even other currencies that include copper prutas. So that's a knockout right there. So Ella, says the Gemara, so rather itmar, if we're going to say over what Rav Asi said, hachi itmar, this is how you have to say. It wasn't exactly like we thought. This is what he said. Amar Rav Yehuda Rav Asi. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav Asi, Kol kesef katsuv ha'amar batara kesef tzuri. Whatever there's a defined amount of money in the Torah, that's using the Torah currency. So if it says 30 shekel, or it says 50 shekel, or it says 100 shekel, and tells you how much it is, that's where it's using the Torah currency. But if it's an undefined amount, like by the Meiser, or by the Hektish, because it's just however amount he's redeeming, right? Or if it's by Kiddushin, where you could use as much as you want. It's not a specific amount, maybe a minimal amount, but there's no specific amount for Kiddushin. So all those places, it doesn't have to be the Torah currency. But when it says a specific amount, that's talking about in the Torah currency, the Tyre currency. And then he went on and he said, V'shal Tivrayim, but when the Chachamim speak, when we talk about things midrabanan, rabbinic, that's Kesef Medina, they're talking about the Medina currency, the country's currency, which was 1/8 of the Kesef Tzuri. Asks the Gemara, Mai Kamashmalan, what is this teaching us then? If that's all he's telling us, that when the Torah says a specific amount, it means you should use the Tzur currency. Tanina, we already learned that in a Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Chamesh Slaim Shal Ben. The 5 selah that you need to pay to a Kohen to do Pidyon HaBen, to redeem a firstborn son. Or Shloshim Shel Eved. Or the 30 that's paid to the owner of a slave. If your ox gores his slave, then you have to pay the owner 30 kesef. You have to pay him 30 silvers. V'shel ones v'shel mefata meya. If a man rapes or seduces a young woman, a young girl, he has to pay a fine of 100. Chamishim. Sorry, I read it wrong. Chamishim shalonis shamfat. He pays a fine of 50. And meya shal motzi shemra. If a man is motzi shemra, he slanders a girl and says that she had already had relations with someone when she hadn't. And he slanders her, and he's found to be lying. So he pays the fine of 100 to her family. So what currency is that? Kulam b'shekel HaKodesh. They're all with the holy shekel, but they're b'mana tzuri. They're evaluated with the tzur currency. So it's a Mishnah. So the Mishnah says when the Torah specifies, these are the examples where the Torah is specifying an amount, and it says to use the mana tzuri, the Tyre currency. So what is Rav Asi adding? He's just repeating a Mishnah. Says the Gemara, V'shal divrayim kesef medina itzrichalei. He's coming to teach you the second part, that whenever the Rabbanan speak, they're talking about kesef medina. Delotnan, because that's not taught in that Mishnah. Titania, as we learn in a brisa, hatokel chavero. If a person, to understand this, either blows in his friend's ear or he smacks his friend on the ear, and he has to pay for embarrassing him. Busha. So it says, it's actually a Mishnah, I think. Tanan, it should say. The Mishnah says, no sing lo sela. He has to pay him a sela. Now, what kind of sela is that? Is that a sela in the tzur currency? I think a sela is, we're going to say, is four zuz. So, in the tzur currency. So, is that 4 zuz in the tzur currency? So, he says, no. That Asi was coming to tell you that when the Rabbanan said, you pay a sela, they didn't mean a tire sela, they meant a sela of the Medina, our type of sela, which is 1/8 of that. As the Gemara explains, don't say that this is the sela that's worth 4 zuz of the tire currency. Ela my sela, what is the sela? It's 1/8 of 4 zuz, which is half a zuz. It's palga de zuzah. It's half a zuz in the tire currency. Davidi inchi de karlo palga de zuzah istira. Because people call that half zuz of the tzur currency, they call it a sela. Istira is a sela. They call it a sela. So the Mishnah, when it said you pay a sela, it didn't mean a sela tzur. It meant 1/8 of that. It meant a sela from tzur would be 4 zuz. It meant 1/8 of that. It meant half a zuz. That's what it was talking about. And that's what Rav Asi was coming to explain, was how to understand that Mishnah and other Mishnahs like that. Don't think that the currencies the Chachamim, the sages refer to, are also the currency of Tzur. No, it's a currency of Medina, of the local currency, which was 1/8 of that. Alright, we will stop there, and we will pick up here next week.